before the new year, something really huge happened in the Tetris community that a lot of you have probably already heard about because I'm not a real journalist and lots of other outlets got this story out a long time ago. What I'm really here to talk about, though, is the at times negative response to this story that came from it getting widespread media attention and hitting outside its target audience. I'm not even being very quick to discuss that, as there are a lot of other statements and condemnations that I've already seen about it. But I do think I have a unique perspective to offer that might be helpful in challenging those narratives and ultimately helping shift culture toward a healthier relationship with video games. Firstly, let's talk about what happened. I'm going to go through this somewhat thoroughly just because there's always someone missing some of the context, and I'd rather just cover all my bases than have to fill people in inconsistently in the comments. Tetris is an extremely well-known puzzle game which has been adapted and re-released on many different platforms and had a massive influence on countless other games like it. It's one of those video games that even a lot of people who don't play video games might know about. The release on the NES, or Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo's first home video game console, is still played today, even though it came out in the 1980s, in international competitions for high scores. The game was designed to be playable for as long as the player could keep going. But early designers had no idea how far people were going to push the game, understandably so, and at a certain point the game starts to get weird. The level counter, indicating how far the gradually increasing difficulty has ratcheted up, starts giving the wrong numbers. Or not even giving numbers at all, giving letters instead. The colors of the blocks deviate from what they were designed to be, creating some occasional color combinations that are really difficult to see on screen. There are much more technical explanations out there, but essentially, the game goes so far that the limited memory of the older hardware is exceeded in ways that degrade the game experience, up until the point where, in theory, the player can cause the game to crash. Something about this possibility really captivated the most elite players of the game. As someone who's not a member of the community, I can only speculate, but based on what I've seen from top players in other titles, as well as the speedrunning and challenge running communities for other games, I think it's a combination of wanting to have something that gives you the claim to being the best in the world, wanting to have a unique way of being able to express your skill, and maybe just a little bit of the classic people versus machine conflict. I didn't lose and get a game over. I played so well that the video game crashed first. It brings to mind the legend of John Henry outperforming a drilling machine, or Captain Kirk from Star Trek refusing to accept what's programmed to be a no-win scenario in the Kobayashi Maru simulation. It's the same spirit that drives so many gamers and content creators to play games in deliberately unintended ways, finding ways to surmount or move through barriers intended to guide them through a cohesive experience, instead choosing to move out of bounds and see what bizarre, surreal experiences they can find there. We have a stubbornness, a reactance founded in an existential need to have agency that makes some of us deliberately choose a more difficult path to take. A mountaineer named George Mallory was once purportedly asked why he wanted to climb Mount Everest, and his answer was just, because it's there. Top Tetris players had as their goal to, quote, go for the crash, unquote. It has never been done in the 34 years that the game had been out. Now, whenever a claim like this gets made, someone who doesn't have experience with these kinds of endeavors always comments, you can't really know it hasn't been done before, maybe someone did it and you just haven't heard of them. While it's true that it is an exceedingly difficult thing to prove by the means of verifying someone's individual experience of having done so, these folks fail to understand the magnitude of the achievements and the strength of community that needs to develop to elevate an individual person to the point where they can reach for something like this. It takes a village to raise a world record holder or a top player. When I'd ask about, say, Axe, a Melee player I knew from Arizona, and call him the best Pikachu player in the world, someone would say, what if there's someone better who you just haven't seen play? And my answer to that is, how is this hypothetical person getting that good at the game without being in contact with the wealth of collective knowledge that's been accumulated over decades of trial and error and reiteration by tens of thousands of people? How is this hypothetical person learning to execute their techniques consistently under the influence of tournament nerves against players who will resist more rapidly and intelligently than anything they can expect to train against in the single-player experience of the game? You can make the argument that I can't prove that nobody's done it before now, but I have more faith than I have in most things that Blue Scooty, this 13-year-old kid, is the first human being to ever crash NES Tetris by playing successfully until the game couldn't keep up. Only in community does it get figured out exactly where the game's breaking points are. Only in community are people willing to put on a glove to play a video game because the inputs are so rapid and strenuous that it would injure the hand otherwise. If such a community existed elsewhere in the world where such interest in the game made people do things like this, it would be large enough to be found, and would also actively seek out information from any other community like it, rather than sequestering itself in secrecy. The incentives just aren't there to keep it to yourself if you can learn from other people. If you're still skeptical, I highly recommend watching this video in which a Portal speedrunner explains to the developers of Portal how something like this works.
How long did it take to figure out the bulk of that stuff?
Well, in a very real way, it took about 14 years to figure all that out.
Oh, man.
It's a very collaborative effort, and everything you see in that video kind of builds on the knowledge that the speedrunning community as a whole has been building up for the past 14 years.
The level of study, optimization, and practice it takes to achieve something like this gets beyond the ability of any one person at a certain point. Drop a single person in the ocean, and they have no hope of putting up a fight against a whale. But when people have spent centuries developing smithing and carpentry and food preservation and business management that makes boat building and weaponsmithing and supplying work well enough to assemble a voyage, and we've studied the habits of whales and the capabilities of our tools well enough to come up with a plan, and we've got dozens of sailors capable of taking people out to sea and trained in the plan we came up with, yeah, one person can really stand on the prow of a boat and throw a harpoon at a whale. But no one person ever accomplishes all of those things by themselves. That's something that only happens in community.
The great thing about speedrunning is it is truly a community effort, and the community as a whole basically never gives up, never stops playing, because some people may leave or do something else, but then new people join, and it's just constant, essentially.
This is why I always talk about how the most important aspect of a community is bringing in new people and avoiding driving people away. Some people will find something else to do and leave, but as long as you keep bringing more in, a community will never go away, and its collective knowledge will be passed on, and everyone in that community will benefit as soon as any one person makes a breakthrough on any front. So Blue Scooty did something tremendously impressive that nobody's ever done before in the game of Tetris. Mind you, this happened on December 21st. If you Google the story, you'll see that coverage on major outlets like AP News, NBC News, the New York Times, all came in just this week. The story snowballed, moving from its local community to broader gaming outlets, and then, as viral stories always do, it left its target audience and landed in the laps of some people who had no idea what they were talking about. The really good journalists who have no idea what they're talking about will be able to cover this story well, even though they don't have a grounding in it, and that'll be all the station does with it. But there exist, in our modern media landscape, TV shows which feel the need to broadcast uninformed opinions of their TV personalities in addition to journalism, and one such opinion also went viral for being really, really bad. I'm not going to name it, nor show footage of it, because that does two things. It increases the likelihood that the opinion haver in question is harassed, and it also gives more attention and clicks and views to their bad opinion. I learned the name of the news network from this bad take they put out, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm not trying to reward this news network with more viewership for putting this out. What I will do, though, is address the general gist of their arguments, because they're the same ideas I've been confronted with for a long time about the direction my own career has gone. Some people think video games are a waste of time. They seem not to have this opinion about reading books or watching movies, nor about playing on a soccer team or lifting weights, though, which is confusing. On top of being hubs for community, as we've discussed, video games can be works of art and avenues for self-improvement or competition. Let's look at those two aspects of video games separately for a second. I believe that video games have more potential than any artistic medium, and I think I can make that argument objectively. Books are powerful. But in a game, you could copy the text of a book into a digital version of that book that your in-game avatar can physically find by browsing the shelves of a digital library full of digital versions of other books. That part of the game could be one little corner of a room in an unimportant area of the map that some people never even find, but that others stay in for hundreds of hours reading all the books. The books wouldn't even be that difficult to put in. Just Control-A, copy, paste, add 5 megabytes of data and a little bit of code to make the books interactable in the right way, and now you've got the complete works of William Shakespeare readable in one video game. Make what arguments you will about any individual work of art, because most art people make is worthless to most people. Very few works become widely popular, fewer still that deserve to. I do think that given their relative newness, video games have fewer of these all-time classics to stand up for them as art to take seriously. They also have more moving parts, more aspects of a game that need to work to arrive at a successful product, more cooks who could spoil the broth. But the medium itself just has more that it can do than anything else that's around right now. You can incorporate visual art in 2D or 3D, music, text, dialogue, elements of cinematography, VR, and that's all before we talk about the element that makes a game, its interactivity. Games are a lot better at this than choose-your-own-adventure novels. By involving the player, they create a level of immersion, a sense of stakes, that create empathy with novel lived experiences in ways that no other medium can. A book may ask you to imagine someone's moral dilemma, but a game can give you that moral dilemma and force you to experience the consequences of the decision you make. Add multiplayer, and now all of a sudden players are participating in decisions on a group level, interacting with each other within a work of art in a way that doesn't make sense to even imagine with a book. There are in-game economies, simulations that have taught useful lessons about real-world economics. There are some video games I will not defend as having this much artistic merit, but I can absolutely say the same about music, books, visual art, any medium. And you can too, if you're really being honest with yourself. So if we're making the blanket statement that video games are a waste of time, I would argue that you must also concede that reading books is a waste of time, on the basis that games are an even more powerful artistic medium. But let's approach this from another angle. Maybe it's not reading a book that you want this Tetris record holder to do instead. Maybe you want him to, quote, go outside, unquote. First of all, I'd just like to point out that we have not been designing outside very well for this lately. And it's telling that you tend to hear this complaint a lot more from older people, for whom it was much easier to do. Small towns are dying, and US cities are difficult, even dangerous to traverse without cars, and you're lucky to have a field large enough to play a real game of soccer within walking distance. Third places, in general, places where people know to go for unstructured social interaction, are harder and harder to find. Kids' lives are also becoming more and more structured, meaning they may not have that much time even if they do have a place to go. If the fact that video games do not have an exercise component is a deal breaker for you, consider how many lucrative careers there are where being able to throw an oblong-shaped ball 60 yards is a valuable skill. Now, consider how much money you can make in careers where being able to reverse engineer the coding of a piece of software to find vulnerabilities in that software is a valuable skill. Someone had to do that to figure out how Tetris could be crashed, and even if Blue Scooty wasn't the one who did so, it's a lot less likely anyone would have figured it out if there weren't people like Blue Scooty around who they knew could actually take that information and do something with it. Speedrunners and challenge runners of video games transition pretty well into QA testing positions in game development without even needing that much more training, and it's also just a great first exposure to various different computer science fields. That's something you do get from gaming that you won't generally get from an athletic sport, and it lines up better with our modern economy. Given that you can exercise in a lot of different ways, and that exercise does actually genuinely benefit your performance in competitive games anyway, you can probably get the exercise and still play the game and be fine. I've put my accomplishments as a tournament organizer in college on every resume I've submitted for a job application, because I am legitimately as proud of my accomplishments as a community leader in that space as I am anything else I've done professionally. This kid, Blue Scooty, can say he was the best in the world at something. And not just anything, but something that was very heavily competitive. Something lots of much older, more experienced people were attempting to do concurrently with him that he beat them to. If someone puts that on a resume and tells you they want to dedicate that kind of effort toward the thing you're hiring them to do, that means something. That's worthy of our respect. I'll even go so far as to say, though, that there is still value in a more casual pursuit of a competitive game. Not everything needs to be a resume builder, even from childhood. Only if you can be the best, but even if you're not the best, on a smaller scale, we can still learn from games. It's the same reason so many people are willing to put their kids into Little League Baseball, knowing full well they're never going to be a Major League Baseball player. Learning sportsmanship, teamwork, leadership, communication, mentality, it's all worth it even if you never actually win the championship. The sense of community and camaraderie is still there. You have this game to unite around, a common interest, an activity to fill the lull in conversation, as well as to generate more conversation. We've already established that, in the same way as with an athletic activity, the fact that people assemble in communities around these tasks means that they get much better at these tasks over time, and future generations can benefit from what previous generations learned, and a rich collective knowledge emerges. All of these things, a grandfather teaching a grandson to play catch, a coach becoming a mentor to a young person in more ways than just in the sport, folks will take for granted as valuable aspects of athletic sports, but never seem to consider as positive aspects of competitive video games. My entire YouTube channel is about learning to use the video game of Splatoon as a vector for self-improvement in other aspects of life. It's a prevalent meme in the comments section to claim that something I taught in the video is also dating advice, because a lot of the time it legitimately has been. You can learn about goal setting and maintaining a healthy mindset and how to interact positively with your peers from playing this video game. And even if whether you won the tournament in silly Squid video game ultimately has very little bearing on your life outside that endeavor, the skills you developed in trying to do so do have meaning in life outside of the game. And who's to say that that endeavor is inherently less meaningful than anything else we could be doing? To take a somewhat nihilistic existentialist position, we're all moving toward universal entropy anyway. Anything, quote, meaningful is ultimately impermanent. If it makes us happy, is it really worth that much less than some other thing that could also have made us happy? There's no need to yuck someone's yums here. Some people don't care about who gets a Super Bowl ring. Some people don't care who the best chess player in the world is. And some people don't care about breaking a world record, and the game itself, in Tetris. But news media has always covered these kinds of things as notable milestones of human progress, as feel-good stories for people to cheer for. At least have some consistency with how you decide to cover them. And you know what? Maybe we do overvalue stuff like that. Remember George Mallory, that mountaineer who wanted to climb Everest because it was there? He died trying to climb Mount Everest. Maybe we shouldn't be paying professional athletes as much money as we do, even bearing in mind that they have to retire from their careers at a tremendously young age and the salaries they earn need to account for that. Maybe there are better things for grown adults to be doing with their spare time, not just because we value the activities more, but because they would bring those adults more happiness than what they choose to do instead. Blue Scooty is a 13-year-old child. He does not have a lot of other commitments. He does have other hobbies. He is still exploring. He still does his chores. This is a perfect time in his life to get into something like this. And as a teacher looking at what footage I've seen, he seems pretty well adjusted to it all. This is not the kind of kid I look at in the classroom and feel worried about. He's no god among men, no instant role model, and if he were to come out and say something horrid on the internet at age 15, we shouldn't need to question everything we know about life, because being good at Tetris shouldn't deify anyone. But from all accounts I've heard, he's an upstanding, down-to-earth, sportsman-like guy who's happy with what he's doing, and he's going to be okay. The kids are going to be better than us. That's the way it has always been, because the kids have always been able to see the mistakes their parents make, and their parents learn from the mistakes of their parents. They may make different mistakes than we made, mistakes that, with the experience of adulthood under our belts, we can look at and point out to them. But I genuinely think that were I to compare who I was as an 8th grader to an 8th grader in 2024, I would not look as impressive. I would be less funny, less tolerant, less articulate. It's easy to feel superior or even feel frustrated at someone for not knowing something, forgetting that we ourselves didn't learn that thing until we were so much older than they are right now. Instead, just keep supporting the kids. Let them take their time growing up. Let them find their own way. Let's treat them like we're watching them play our favorite game or watch our favorite movie, not spoiling everything, but letting them experience it in their own way. If we're not constantly tutorializing everything for them, maybe they'll surprise us and approach a challenge in a way we didn't and teach us something new.